Today is Sunday, and it's Chai Tammuz. Yesterday was Shabbat Tammuz, but yesterday was Shabbos, so we didn't fast, because you can't fast on Shabbos. So we have the Rebbe's Torah on this whole scheme. Uba Hagdama. Before we get to the Rebbe's Torah, I want to say something even more basic. And that is that when we make a tonus, according to the Rambam, we make a yoim tzoim, we make a fast, no part of the tonus is avel. No part of the fast is mourning. Because that's not what Jews do. Jews don't wallow in problems, they solve them. Like you have the famous Sikh of the Rebbe, that Yossi cries for Binyamin and Binyamin cries for Yossi, because for yourself you don't cry. For yourself you act. So the idea that we fast as an expression of sorrow is simply not true according to the Rambam. And of course that's what the Rebbe always brings. So what's a fast? If a fast is not a Yom Eivel, what's a fast? So there's two parts. The first part to a fast is that it's a Yom Rotz, it's a special opportunity for tshuva. Every fast day is a day of tshuva. And in fact, it says in Rambam that the reason we fast is as inyan of tshuva. What does the fasting have to do with tshuva? Tshuva is about Avedis and mitzvahs and serving the Eibishter. And fasting is arguably about painik in the goof, about making the body challenged, suffer. So the answer is that when a person fasts, they're hungry. Right? When a person is hungry, he's a little bit more submissive, he's a little bit more nichna, he's less agritzias onto himself. And it's a framework for the Inyan HaTshuvah. This is what the Rambam says. The Rambam says a klal at the beginning of Hilchas Tainis, that when a tragedy happens in the world, and someone responds to this tragedy by saying, Mikra Nikris, es hat sich gemacht, it's happenstance, it's coincidental, it happened to happen kach v'kach. If a person says about an event in this world that's negative, that it's a Mikra Nikris, that it's a coincidence, it's derech havizoris, it's a way of cruelty. Something bad happens in the world, we don't interpret it, we don't say why the Eibusha did it. It's a punishment for this or punishment for that. But to say that there's no message is also not correct. So when something happens to you or to somebody from your chabura, the whole chabura is nisayrid. Nisayrid to do tshuva. Not necessarily because Eibish is on their case and he's going to punish them and if it's a brennen or stechen, but because there's a hira in a Inyan, loy toy for the Inyan HaTshuvah. Since this happened to the whole Klal Yisrael does tshuva on these days. We fast as a part of tshuva. That's one aspect of a fast. So even the first aspect of a fast is not evil. It's not a veilus, we're not mourning. The first aspect of a fast is that it's a basis, it's a foundation, a basis on which you can eat in that tshuva. That's number one. And then number two, every fast has to do with Mashiach Tzidkenu. Because like it says in Sfarim, that when the Eibishter punishes Yidden, he's preserving them. And that's why Chedesh Av is called Menachem Av. Menachem Av means a father who's full of nichumin, full of consolation. How could you call Chedesh Av Chedesh Menachem Av? They should destroy the Beis HaMikdash. So I don't have time to go into that ichas because I want to learn Tanya. But the nekuda is that when the Eibishter gives a patch, it's preserving us. So the Yemei Ha'evel, the specific days when the biggest tzaras happen to Klal Yisrael, are bepnimiyas rachamim, and when Mashiach comes, this rachamim is revealed, and it becomes the biggest Yom Tov of all. Like the Rambam finishes Hilchas Tainis, that Yehavchu Yom Meil L'Sosnu L'Simcha V'Emes V'Shalom Ha'Hevu, Mashiach is going to come, and the Yemei Atzoim, the fast days are going to become Yomim Tovim. The biggest, I always tell this to you, and Mashiach is coming. But Zayin, we have 5 days, Simchas Beis Hashem Sukkos, yeah? Mashiach's going to come, we're going to have 3 weeks, and it's more than 3 weeks. Because Tisha B'Av is not the 21st day, it's the 22nd day from Shabbat Shabbat. And Tisha B'Av continues about a day and a half until you off. You're going to have 22, 23 days of our carnival. The whole Eretz Yisrael, and we're going to celebrate the Gula Midas Vashtayim. It's going to start with a big Yom Tov in the beginning and a big Yom Tov at the end. This is going to be called Tzema Ravi, Shivasa B'Tammuz. This is going to be called Tzema Chamishi, Tisha B'Av. And in between there's going to be Not Bein HaMitzorim, but Yemei HaSimcha VaHaSosim. So the question becomes, the Eibush destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. But you all know, the Eibush destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, we earned it to our ill deeds, right? So Amisnagid is going to say, Akalta Beri is going to say, the Eibush is punishing us. The Eibush is taking revenge. But that's not true. The Eibush is not punishing us, the Eibush is keeping us. And sometimes, in order to keep us, he has to break the Beis HaMikdash, like a Yetzeves, and listen to Golos. But it's all about keeping us. This is why when Mashiach comes, you don't simply say that the Tanis is bottled. You don't fast. You say that the Tanis is transformed into a Yom Tov. So what I just said briefly is, number one, B'chlal, the fast days are not Eivel, not Yemei Eivel, not the days of mourning. That's number one. But a fast day, Taka has two in Yonim. The first in of a fast day is the fasting which is associated with the fast, with fasting itself. And the idea that when Mashiach comes, this is going to become a Yom Simcha. It's not going to be neutralizing. It's a Yom Simcha. And if you know the Mamre Chazal, this is all discussed in the Rebbe's Teirin. See this, that the Gemara says, when Mashiach comes, Kol Hameid, or the Medrash says, Kol Hameid and B'Teirin. Mashiach comes, Yom Tevim HaBottle, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot HaBottle. Chanukah and Purim are still going to be. Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot are going to be bottle. So of course, Chassidus says that cannot be. It's impossible to say that Yom Tov is bottle. Why not? Because Ateidah Hazu Lo Yitiyah Mechlefes, amongst the 13 principles of the Rambam, was that the Torah is forever. The Torah never changes, doesn't change an iota. So, if the Torah never changes, how can you say that the Moedim are B'Teira? So Chassidus answers, of course we're going to have Pesach after Mashiach comes. We're going to have Sukkot and Shavuos. But the Gili of Mashiach is going to be so bright. The Gili of Mashiach is going to be so bright that Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, you're going to do the mitzvahs. But the everyday oil of Mashiach is going to overwhelm the oil that's special for Yom Tov, so you're not going to see that it's a moed. In other words, if every day you experience a higher light than the light of Pesach, so you do Pesach, but there's nothing to experience because it's baratul kishraga batira, like a candle in the sunlight, in the daylight. So of course we're going to have Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, but the oil of Mashiach is going to be even greater. And then you say, but Chanukah and Purim are still going to be special. Why? Because Chanukah and Purim are Yom Tevim of Mesilas Nefesh, and even after Mashiach comes, Mesilas Nefesh is going to be outstanding. It'll be special days, and then we're going to have brand new Yom Tevim, which we never had. What do you mean the new Yom Tevim? New Tzeim HaAsiri and Tzeim HaRavi and Tzeim HaChamishi and Tzeim HaShvi, Asar B'Tevis, in that order. Shavas B'Tamas, Tisha B'Yov, and Tzeim Gidal. That's the chronological order of these events. Are going to become Yom Tevim. So the biggest Yom Tevim after Mashiach comes is going to be the days which we now fast. Because then we're going to see Begilu, these are the days of the maximum ahava of the Eibishter to Yidden. So now comes the Vort. This year, Shavasa B'Tamas was Shabbos, so we didn't fast. So the Rebbe, Shtag Hochzach Tak Nun Aleph, 1991, the same Kriyas like this year, Shavasa B'Tamas as the Bishop were also Shabbos. And there was a Lekutasichas that came out then, and the Rebbe also spoke it in the Nisichas and the Mugadik Sichas at the time. This idea that Rebbe holds, and the Rebbe's mad. Rebbe had a name. Rebbe had a name. His name is Rabbi Yehuda Anas. But he's not called Rabbi Anas. He's called the Rebbe. And the Rebbe holds Kiv on the Itche. The Rebbe said that once a fast day is pushed away, it's pushed away. Which means that according to Das Rebbe, we wouldn't fast today. Since yesterday was Shabbos, Shavasa B'Tamas, you couldn't fast. No, if you couldn't fast Shavasa B'Tamas, you don't fast at all. We don't paskin like Rebbe. We paskin to Chachomim. They're a Rabbim and he's a Yochid, even though he's the Rebbe and they're not the Rebbe. The Rabbim held that you have to fast Be'efen Shel Nitchi. You do it the next day. And of course, on Tanya Sester, we push it back to Thursdays, which will to have Purim. So the Rebbe kochs on this idea. The Rebbe says, Kiv Nitcha. Why? Because we believe in Hashgacha Pratis. And we believe in Hashgacha Pratis on a level that's called Atzmus, higher than Seichel. Which means when Api Seichel, two things converge. Because they can't possibly not converge. It's impossible, though. You should have 4 fasts or 5 fasts every year, and we have a calendar like we have it, that now one of them should fall on Shabbos. It's not like in America, you make a holiday either on a Thursday or on a Monday. You move it to the closest Thursday, you move it to the closest Monday to have an extended weekend. We don't have President's Day on Monday and this day on Thursday, so how about a longer weekend? If it comes out on Friday, it's on Friday. It comes out on Tuesday, it's on Tuesday. Fartik. So it's impossible. It's like you have so many fasts that one of them shouldn't fall on Shabbos. So you can't help it. So what do you want? Azeidos, that's a calendar. But everything is Ba'adgacha Pratis. So even though With Derech HaTeva, it's impossible to avoid the phenomenon of a fast on Shabbos. This becomes Ratzon Ha'elyon. So the Rebbe says, and this is what the Rebbe explains, that when a fast falls on Shabbos, it's a message from the Meibishter. What's the message from the Meibishter? That this year, the Yom Tzeim doesn't even have the aspect of Tshuva. It has only the positive aspect, that it's a preparation for a day when it's going to be a Yom Tov, the greatest Yom Tov of all, which is going to be when Mashiach comes. So the Rebbe says, the Eibishter says to a Yid, normally on this day, there's two ideas. There's correcting the past, that's the fast and the Tshuva. There's anticipating the future, that's the idea that Mashiach comes. These days are going to be celebrated as the days of the greatest Ahava from the Eibishter to Yidden. You know this, but it's worth repeating anyway. That the Rebbe wrote a letter to the president of Eretz Yisrael, and the Hebrew title for president in Eretz Yisrael is Yossi. Yossi, Nun Shin Yud Aleph. And the Rebbe would not address him as Yossi. Instead, he wrote Mr. Mar Ben Tzvi. It's discussed. It's not respectful. The president of a country writes you a letter. He writes a letter, schreib richtig. So the Rebbe writes a whole letter to him. It doesn't matter what the letter is. I don't know what the letter is. I remember this. But then there's a PS, the Nun Beis, a postscript. And the Rebbe writes in the postscript, I'm sure you noticed that I did not address you as I'm supposed to address you formally as Yossi. And then the Rebbe says, but it's hard for me to do so. Why? Because miyem holchi l'cheder, the Rebbe writes. From the time I went to Cheder. Ve'eid kedem l'cheder, even before I started to go to Cheder. His chil hisrakim b'moicha, I began to develop in my mind the image of Mashiach is going to come. Now remember, when the Rebbe was heilig l'cheder, it was before World War I. When the Rebbe is writing this letter, it's after World War II. And we know what Yidden went through between those, when the Rebbe was heilig l'cheder and when he wrote the letter. And the Rebbe writes, and in my imagination, I imagine the coming of Mashiach. And that Mashiach, he writes up beautiful words, but one of the things he writes, Mashiach is going to be so good that every Yid is going to say, Eidcha havaya ki anavcha bi. Nafta bi, Yoshev abchos nachamin. It's a pasuk in Yeshaya. That we're going to thank the Eibishter for the tzaddiks. Do you imagine? Do you imagine Mashiach coming and we're going to be able to thank the Eibishter for the tzaddiks? How could you imagine such a thing, yeah? The Rebbe once said in the Fabrengen that the reason it's impossible to imagine how good Mashiach is I'm skipping. Erase that. Anyway, the point is that Mashiach is not only the end of the tzaddiks, it reveals how in these challenges you have the maximum ahava from the Eibishter to Yidden. So when the fast day falls on Shabbos, the Eibishter is saying, I'm not letting you fast. So the Rebbe paskins that the Eibishter is saying, this year, this fast day is only a day to anticipate Mashiach. It's not a day to look to the past and the Avedis and the Tshuvas, just for a positive day. So Lapel, we don't paskin like Rebbe, so we're all fasting today. Otherwise, those who are able to fast, okay, so the brisker is when they frum. And when people came to Reb Chaim about people fasting, it was a big makel. People came, Kippur is a shayla, Tisha B'Av is a shayla, the other fast is less of a shayla. And Reb Chaim was a big makel, so they told Reb Chaim, there was Chalma, Azei Frum, why are you so makel when it comes to the halachas of people fasting? He said, I'm not makel in the halachas of people fasting, I'm being machman in the halacha, v'shmarte ma'oidle nafshesechem. But that was gedenken. Reb Chaim said, I'm being machmir in a different mitzvah. It says in the Torah, you have to take care of your health. The shmata, it's not a kula, it's a chumrah. V'shmarte ma'oidle nafshesechem. Anyway, so api halacha, you can only do like this one or like this one. Yeah, who's right, as they say in Yeshivish? Rebbe is never wrong because he was in the minority. The Chachamim are right because they were in the majority. But that's only in halacha l'maisa, what you do. But in Higoyin, it's elu ve'elu divided l'kem chaim. You have to choose. They're both right. There's two madregas. On a lower madrege, when a fast falls on Shabbos, the Chachamim say, Hazachaim, we're still in Golos, and we still need to do tshuva, so fast on Sunday. And a higher madrege, Rebbe says that the Eibishter is saying, this year you don't need to do tshuva, this year you focus only on the positive thing. So even though we technically do like Chachamim, but in Higoyin, in our mind, we understand that this is a message from the Eibishter, that this year, this fast day, is only a day preparing us for the Yom Mashiach. What's Mashiach? That we look at these events, these days, and we say that this was the expression of the ultimate love of the Eibishter to Yidden. Okay, that speech took longer than I planned. It took 15 minutes. Much longer than I planned. Let's start learning Tanya Kedisha. Peirik Dalet. Okay, Peirik Dalet. Good news. Anaya Peirik. Peirik Dalet. The neshama is divided into three. Perek Beis, Perek Gimel, Perek Dal. That's how it works. Perek Beis, chapter 2, the Alter Rebbe discussed the neshama and its origins, where the neshama comes from. And to generalize and simplify to a significant degree, we're going to say that Perek Beis talks about the idea of neshama as being a chelik elakam imal mamish, a piece of the Eibush from above mamish. Or the other expression, Yisrael all over machshava, that Yidden are part of Eibish's machshava. And we spent a lot of time discussing this idea. The neshama comes from the Eibush, it's a piece of the Eibush. The second discussion of the neshama is in Perek Gimel, chapter 3, and we took 3/4 of a year probably to learn Perek Gimel, which is one of the shortest prakim in Tanya. Here the Alter Rebbe discusses the tzir of the neshama, the form of the neshama, the body of the neshama. Or to say it in different words, an infinite neshama comes into a finite world, needs screens, it needs garments. So there should be a constructive interface between an infinite neshama and a finite world, or between one infinite neshama and another infinite neshama. They shouldn't destroy each other. This is called koiches, and if you were here over this winter, we talked about koiches and also talked about chushim. Koicha means the faculties, the tools that a person was given, the basic tools that a person has is his mind and his heart. And then you have the chushim, the senses, riyah, shmiyah, tav, reich, you should see, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. That the asara koiches and the hamisha chushim are limiting expressions of the neshama. The neshama is infinite, and it's one. Chochma is finite, and it's one way the neshama speaks. Chesed is finite. It's another way the neshama speaks. Netzach is finite, and it's another way how the neshama speaks. And the same is true of the senses of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. So this is called the koiches hanefesh. The koiches hanefesh allow for the neshama to live in a real world. It allows to relate to other neshamas. It allows to take in and to give out, to learn Torah, to do mitzvahs. If the neshama came into this world in its infinity, there'd be no process in terms of a yid serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we spent forever on this middle level, and this is Perek Gimel, chapter 3 in Tanya. Now we begin Perek Dal, chapter 4, Perek Dal. Now Perek Dalet has two parts. The first page, and the second page, and the third page, which continue into Perek Hey. What happens on this page is the Alter Rebbe introduces us to the lowest level of the neshama. The neshama has a pnimius, an inside, a middle, and an outside. The inside of the neshama is the neshama is mentioned to Hashem, Perek Beis. The middle of the neshama is the personality, the character of the neshama as it comes into the world. This is Perek Gimel. And the outside of the neshama is how the neshama actually relates to things outside of itself. And this is called levushim hanefesh. Levushim. Perek Beis is koiches, tools, and I added chushim, which are not written in Tanya at all. And Perek Gimel is levushim, garments. Garments means, even after a person's neshama has been given a brain and a heart and senses to interact with other things and other people and other ideas in a measured way, in an interactive way, in a way that you can share. One can speak, another can listen, the second can argue, and the first can disagree, and they can go back and forth, and so on and so forth. You need the actual vehicles of the communication itself. The Eibishter gave us tools to limit the infinity of the neshama, to be able to come into a finite world, but then it actually comes into the finite world. And it's coming into the finite world has three levels. 3 garments, 3 levushim. You have 3 shirts, 3 layers. The first layer is how the neshama communicates with itself. It talks to itself. This is called thought. The second garment is how the neshama communicates with others that are like itself. That is called speech. And there's how the neshama communicates with things outside of itself that are not like itself. This is called action. Drei levushim, 3 garments. The neshama has an additional 3 garments that allow the neshama that's been prepared to be able to live in this world, to actually interact, to connect to other things that are in this world. It can think when it talks to itself, it can speak when it's speaking to other human beings, and it can act in its relationship with others. And that's what Perek Dalet begins with. The first page of Perek Dalet discusses the shleisha levushim of machshava, dibur, and ma'aseh, thought, speech, and action. So let's read inside Perek Dalet. V'oid. In addition to what we discussed in Perek Beis about the neshama being a chelik al-kavim al-mamish and Yisrael all over machshava. And in addition to we had in Pei Gimel, which is called Esekeches HaNefesh, and we talked about all Esekeches HaNefesh and the Chamisha Chushim, even though the Alter Rebbe doesn't say all of it. In addition, Yesh HaNefesh Alakis, every godly soul has additionally Shlei Shol Levush, 3 outer garments. If you have an idea in your mind, you have to be able to deliver it. You can't deliver it to yourself without thinking it over. You can't deliver it to somebody else without speaking it. And you can't deliver it to make a change in the real world without doing it. So in the neshama, there are garments, there are funnels, there are tools of tzimtzum that allow whatever the neshama understands and feels and experiences to be transmitted to the world through these 3 mediums of thought, speech, and action. So the nefesh of the kiss had shleisha levush of 3 garments. Shehein that they are machshava, dibur, u'maisa. Thought, speech, and action. And again, thought means how you talk to yourself. Unless you're a Rebbe, then you can talk to others yourself, and so on. Dibur, you speak to another, but someone who is like you, about seichel. And maisa means how you speak to something which is less than yourself. And he adds that these 3 garments are shel, taryag, mitzvahs hateda. Of the 613 mitzvahs of the Teda. What is the Rebbe saying in these words? What the Rebbe is saying in these words, that in Tanya you discover that you have 2 nefashos. You have 2 souls. Yeah? Nefesh Elokis, the divine soul, which is discussed in chapters 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then Nefesh Abahamis, an animal soul, which we'll get to in Mitzvah Hashem, which is chapters 6 and 7, and maybe B'deichak 8. Okay? You have a few brachim dedicated to Nefesh Elokis. You have a few brachim dedicated to Nefesh Abahamis. In Maimonides Chassidus, and not in Tanya, there's a 3rd nefesh, which is called Nefesh HaSichlis, an intellectual soul, which is Kirid Mamutza. It's in between Nefesh Elokis and Nefesh Abahamis. So one of the things that's interesting about the way Chassidus breaks it down is that it breaks it down very, very technically, very, very clinically. Okay? It doesn't simply say that the Nefesh Elokis is a drive towards a lakus, and the Nefesh Abahamis is a drive towards behemius, and the Nefesh HaSichlis has no drive. He just wants to know what makes sense. Yeah, Nefesh Elokis, a seichel. The biggest problem with seichel, looking for the emes, but doesn't really care about it. Just wants to understand. Nefesh HaSichlis. Nitazeh. It's not just you have a God drive and an animal drive and a seichel, which is whatever he's doing, driving, standing still, moving in a circle, certainly cold. Yeah. But that each nefesh is a whole personality. Your godly soul is not only a drive towards godliness. Your godly soul has an essence. It has the faculties of a mind and a heart, and the senses of Yish, Mit, Amrech, and Mishush, and Levush. In other words, you have 2 different sets of Machshava, Dibur, Maisa. You have 2 different sets of Chochma, Bina, Vadas. 2 different sets of Chesed, Gevurah, Teferes. You have 2 different sets of Netzach, Heid, Yised. It's not the pshat that your neshama, when you're doing godly things, so you're using your brain in a godly way. When you're doing animal things, using your brain, an animal brain. It's a different brain. With different limitations, different possibilities. And again, in Tanya you have only 2 nefashos. In Maimonides Chassidus, which come after the Tanya, you have a 3rd nefesh, which is called the Nefesh HaSichlis, which we're not going to learn about. We're going to learn the Tanya, the way it's written in the Tanya. But you should understand that there's 2 different life forces. So let's say a person is doing a mitzvah. If he's doing a mitzvah, he's using the levush ha'maisa of his Nefesh Elokis. If in the middle of doing a mitzvah, he turns to the guy next to him, he gives him a zetz. That zetz also came from the levush ha'maisa, but from the levush ha'maisa of Nefesh Abahamis. It's divided up in a split second. You go from nefesh to nefesh. When you're doing a good thing, it's from Nefesh Elokis. When you're doing a bad thing, it's Nefesh Abahamis. When you're doing a good thing with a bad kavana or a bad thing with a good kavana, it could be a chol, it could be a mix. But you cannot simply see the 2 nefashos as a basic drive, as a surge. This is going to Zalakus, this is going to Behemius, like Rivka's pregnancy. But they're 2 complete creations. So when it says over here, Shel Tayag Mitzvahs HaTorah means exactly that. When you think Torah, you're using the Levush HaMachshav of Nefesh Elokis. When you speak Tefillah, you're using the Levush HaDib of Nefesh Elokis. When you do a Maisa HaMitzvah, you're using the Levush HaSiyah of Nefesh Elokis. And when you're doing other things, it's a different Levush. In the human experience, it happens seamlessly, yeah? If in the middle of davening, you give a guy a zetz or an elbow, you don't feel how this neshama clicks in and that neshama clicks out, another nefesh. You don't feel subconsciously how you're changing the fashas back and forth, like you take changing gears on a bicycle or in a car. But it happens that every good thing comes with Nefesh Elikis all the way down to the madreg of the levushim, and everything which is not good comes from Nefesh Abahamis all the way down to the levushim and all the way up to the Yetzim HaNefesh. And the Rebbe Poshet talks it out. He explains it. When a do fulfills behaviorally, actually, all mitzvahs that are connected to Asiyah. And when he's learning Torah, in his speaking, he's engaged. Bepirush, in interpreting Kol Tayag mitzvahs and all the 630 mitzvahs and their laws. In other words, he's learning Torah, but he's learning Torah on a level where he has to bring it down to a level of speech. He has to talk it out. Because he needs to know, what should I do b'payah? And if you want to know what you need to do b'payah, you can't learn Torah in a theoretical way. You have to bring it down to a level that has a relationship with action. And the Rebbe calls this dibur. And he continues, u'b'machshava, and in your thought, hu'masik, this Jew reaches and understands the Hebrew word hasagah. We talked about this when I gave you my Bina Shiyurim. It's been a long time since we did Bina, but you can go online and get them. I talked to you about many different words that mean, right, there's Tfisa, there's Iyun, there's Hasaga, there's Havchana. These are all Bina words. Hasaga means to reach, to catch up to. And the Raya is in Chumash. Lavan chases Yankov Avinu when he catches up to him. What's the Hebrew word for Lavan catching up to Yankov? Vayaseg. The Yaakov means he understood him, he reached him. So the word Hasaga means to intellectually reach, to use your seichel to get to something. That's the taich of the word Hasaga. U'b'machshavan in one's thought, hu'masik, he reaches, der grech, der kumt on. Kol ma she'efshel elahasig, whatever it's possible for him to reach and understand. Bepardes hateira, in any or all of the four levels of Pshat, Remes, Drush, Seid. Pardes is an abbreviation, it's an acronym for Pshat. Pshat means understanding Torah on a simple level. Remes means understanding how the Torah has in it hints. Drush means how the Torah has in it ideas which are not explicit, but they're extracted from them through a system of limud, which is called medrash. There's a fancy English word with 6 syllables that represents it that I don't know. And then there is Seid, the secrets of Torah. How in the Torah you have, in the Lashon HaRambam, Yediyas Hashem, every single word of the Torah teaches about the Eibishter himself. There's a level of the Torah which is not about Kiyum and Mitzvahs. It's about, again, in the Lashon HaRambam, Ladas as Hashem Bilvad. There's a level of Torah where every single word of Torah talks to you about the Eibishter himself. And this is called Sei, this is called Kabbalah. And a Yid has a chiyuv to learn Kol HaTorah Kula B'Pardes. The Rebbe says in Shulchan Aruch, in Hilchos Talmud Torah, it's known that every neshama comes begilgul pam achapam until it will be lemit Kol HaTorah Kula B'Pardes. It comes back and it learns the whole Torah, the entire Torah, on all 4 levels of Pshat, and Remez, and Drush, and Seid. Pshat, and Remez, and Drush, and Seid. So learning Torah in this way is called Iyun. Iyun, it's concentration. It's not about, in the Lashon Harav, Hamaisa Sheyasun Ve'ela Asher Leisa Asena. You're not learning the Torah to know what to do and what not to do, right? That's a lower level. It's called Dreish V'Kabel Schar. You're learning Torah to receive reward. Or that through Torah, a Yid is Dovek and Elokus. A Yid becomes one with the Eibishter. Or even at a higher level, you're learning Torah to be Makash the Torah with the Eibishter. To connect the Torah with Hashem. But this limud is not to know what to do. This is simply to be engaged in Chachmas Hashem. And it's important to emphasize, a Jew does not need a reason to learn Torah. He needs a reason not to. A Yid, especially a man, is mechuyev in Talmud Torah to learn Torah. And the highest shiur is v'agisa be'yomam v'layla. Torah is supposed to learn day and night. There's also a possibility that a person can't. So if there's a lesser shiur, the minimum shiur of limud Torah for a man is every day Pedek Echad Shachar is Pedek Echad Arv. There's a little a halacha in the morning and halacha at night. Right? That's why you say in the morning, Kol Hashem halachas b'chol yom. You have to learn Torah a little bit every day, twice. Once in the morning and once at night. Why are you learning Torah? Like the famous story with the policeman. You know the policeman, right? The Rav, you sit a whole night and learn. And They got a new policeman, so he came to the community to give masir. What's the masir? That your Rav is not a good Rav. Man Veisen. He says, because he says, a ganze Nacht is still money. A whole night is looking in the books. So the Yidden say, what do you expect a Rav to do a whole night? Well, he should sleep like us. He says, I went to the police academy and I studied, I read books and I got exams. But once you graduate, you finished, you have the certificate. You don't have to look at any books anymore. This Rav has a certificate, he's looking at books. So somebody must have failed the exams. You don't need a reason. You need a reason not to. And the Rebbe used to say all the time that the Rebbe said, before you know, listen to Shalom Beis, you want to give me a matana, the first matana you could give me is a matana of Teira. Pashat limud Teira. So when you're learning Teira to know what to do, the Alter Rebbe includes that in Dibur. When you're learning Teira to understand the Teira, Kol Mash Efshel HaHasib B'Chayadas HaTeira, each person, for Yecholte and so on and so forth, this includes in Machsheves Ha'iyun. It's a learning which is about understanding the theory behind the Teira, rather than trying to bring it down to a practical level. This he included in Machshav. And by the way, included in Dibur is not just speaking Divrei Teira. Chayim Heim, it's Eyem Beped. The halacha is. This is a Miftzayim experience. I'm sure the women have this also, but when you go on Miftzayim and you're a young bachar for the first time, and you put film on a fellow, and you give him a paper, you say, read it. So he looks at it. And you say, read it. And he looks at it. And you say, read it. He says, I'm reading it. He says, no, you're not reading it. You're looking at it. Because nobody reads with their lips. In second grade, you read with your lips. When you graduate, you learn how to read, you read with your eyes. When you say to someone, I'm saying, read it, you mean say it. Say it when you do, but we're so used to it, we don't realize how strange it is. Because in the world, you read with your eyes. Why do you have to say it b'dibur? So it says in Chazal, Chayim Hei, right? Eitz Chayim Hi LaMachazikim Chov, right? But on this pasuk goes in Gemara, Chayim Hei LaMeitzeihem. So the Chazal teach Chayim Hei LaMeitzeihem bepeh. You get schar for limud Teira when you say it b'dibur. If you sit a whole day and you think Teira, you're not makan the mitzvah of Talmud Teira. The mitzvah of Talmud Teira is to say it b'dibur. Sometimes the dibur gets in the way. If you're involved in deep thought, then you don't speak because you have to concentrate. But the mitzvah, the technical chiyuv, the mitzvah of Talmud Teira is when you do it b'dibur. Okay? So again, I wanted to say that first. And the second thing I wanted to say, there's many other mitzvahs that are b'dibur. Krishma, Bechas HaMazon, which are the Eraisis, and Tefillah, and Haggadah Shal Pesach. There's a lot of mitzvahs which you do b'dibur. So the Eibush gave us 3 garments: thought, speech, action, machshava, dibur, or maaseh. That the shloisha levushim, the 3 garments which a Yid uses to connect to the world outside of him. And that's the 3rd dimension of the Neshama. The Neshama's connection to higher, we learned the Perek Beis, what the Neshama's personality and character is. We learned the Perek Gimel, and now we're learning the Neshama's connection to the world around himself. Machshava, dibur, or maaseh. Okay? Harei, then, consequently, I'm 6 lines into Perek Dalet. Kol Tanya, Klolos Tanya Gevei Nafshi. If you use your action, your arms and legs for mitzvahs, and your mouth for tefillah and teira and so on, and your thought, machshava se'ir, so that your entire body, melubashim, are enclosed within. In other words, it's like they're putting on a shirt of, the shirt on top of my goof. The neshama puts on a shirt, a mitzvah. Which part of the neshama is wearing that shirt? It depends which part of the person is doing that mitzvah. But if you do all Taryag mitzvahs, the whole person's goof, which is made up of Ramach Evidim, which is Hagidim, are wearing garments of Machshava, Dibur, or Maaseh, of Teiro mitzvah, or Bepratius, and this is in general. Klolos, Tayaki, Bari Nafshe, Melubashe, Matayak mitzvah. The entire person is wrapped, is dressed in a shirt of the Tayag mitzvah Teiro. Shirt. Or Bepratius. And if you break it down more, you have, it becomes a little bit more complex. First of all, the seichel of the person, the intelligence of the person, milubashes, becomes enclosed. When one is busy understanding the tape, Shumasa, that one reaches and understands the pardes in one or all of the 4 levels of Pshat, and Emes Drush and say. Kifi Yechelas Hasagosei based on the possibility of his reach. The Sheidish Nafshei Lamayla, on the root of his neshama on high. In other words, Rabbi Isai, we know that when you learn Torah, depending on how you're learning and what you're learning it either with your mouth or with your thought. So when you're learning Torah, either with your mouth or with your thought, so Torah and the garment of thought and the garment of speech become a shirt for you. They become a levush on top of you. Which part of you is levushed, is garmented, is covered over when you're learning Torah? The Chabad, the Chochmah Bina V'Lev. In general, the whole goof is surrounded by all mitzvahs when you do them all. Specifically, when you're learning Torah with either dibur or machshava, you're creating a levush for your Chabad. Your intellect, your seichel, your brain, your head are enclosed, are wearing a shirt of the words of speech and the letters of thought that you're speaking and thinking in your understanding of Torah. And he continues, the hamides, and the 6 emotions which are in the heart, she'ein yira v'ahava, which are fear and love, the anfeim and their branches, but they're saying, and their offspring, which means that you have yira and you have chesed, you have gebura and teferes. And then you have netzach, and then you have hoid, and then you have yisoid. And if you can remember the classes I gave you this winter and the early spring, you also have malchus. So then these mides, meluboshes, are garmented, are shirted, are wearing a jacket, a shirt, b'kiyum ha-mitzvahs b'maisel b'dibur. In doing the mitzvahs that you do in action, and also the mitzvahs that you do in speech. And when you do a mitzvah in thought, it's in your brain. You do a mitzvah in action, it's in your goof. You do a mitzvah of speech, it can be a little here, a little ahead, in both places. Okay? Shehu, which is Talmud Torah, shekeneged kulam, the speech of Torah, dibur, which is against all of the mitzvahs. And I'm going to pause right here. So the Rebbe says, B'klal, when a Yid learns Torah, does the mitzvahs, he uses his levusha and you cannot learn Torah without using your levusha machshava, your levusha dibur. You can't do mitzvahs without using the levusha dibur and the levusha maiseh, and they're shirts for you. In other words, why do you have a power of speech? Why do you have a power to act? Why do you have a power of thought? Why do you have these garments? Bepashtis, you have these garments, so you should be able to connect to the world around you. Right? So it's for. Here the Rebbe says different. You have a garment of thought, a garment of speech, a garment of action to dress yourself. Not only to be able to communicate to the people around you and to the things around you, but to make a beged for you of Yiddishkeit. When you learn Torah and you do mitzvahs, b'machshava, dibur or maiseh, you are garmenting, you're dressing yourself up, you're surrounding yourself with a levush of either machshava or dibur or maiseh. And he continues. Ki, ha'ava, hishedish, kol ramech, mitzvahs aseh. The Rebbe has a poshet tekasha. He starts off the Pedic by saying that when you learn Torah and do mitzvahs, you create buklos. Buklos means in general garments of Yiddishkeit for your whole group. Then he speaks bepratius. What's bepratius? That when you learn Torah, you make a garment for your moyach. But then he says when you do mitzvahs, you create a garment for your leif, for your midas. The Rebbe says, what does midas have to do with film and kosher and Shabbos and mikveh and challah and kiddush and avdolah and alla good zachen? I want to share mitzvahs. What does my heart have to do with the mitzvahs? So he answers, Ki, the reason is, the connection is, ha'ahava, one's feelings of love, is shadish, is the root of kol ramach mitzvahs aseh. All 248 positive mitzvahs. Umimena heinim shaches, and the 248 mitzvahs come from midas ha'ahava. Ubilada, and if you don't have love for the Eivishter, ein lahem kiyam amiti. You cannot do the mitzvahs mitanemes. Ki hamakayim b'yemes, in order to do mitzvahs mitanemes, who ha'ayev v'shem Hashem, it's only if you love the Eivishter. V'chafetz l'dofka, when you desire to become one with Him, be'emes. And the Alter Rebbe adds, these are very, very important words. V'efshet, and it's impossible. L'dofka be'emes, to become attached to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ki'im, only b'kiyum, in the fulfillment of Ramach Pikud in the 248 mitzvahs. Sheheim, Ramach, Eividim, the Malchut HaYachal, the 248 limbs of Eibishter's Guf, That's going to be explained someplace else. Now, where is someplace else? Here in the Maramokim is Metayin, the Perek Chav Hey and Perek Lamed Hey, Perek Chav Gimel, chapter 23 and Perek Chav Gimel and Tanya discusses this idea. So when you do a mitzvah, you're using Avos Hashem. Now sometimes you're not using so much Avos Hashem because the mitzvah is not so good. Yeah, the better the mitzvah, the more the Ahava. The less the Ahava, the less quality of the mitzvah. But you can't do a mitzvah. You certainly can't do a mitzvah that is on Avos Hashem. So because the motivation for every mitzvah is Avos Hashem, when you do the mitzvah, you're creating a lavush, a garment of getlachkeit on you, not only on your arm that did the mitzvah, on your leg the mitzvah, but on the heart that created the ahava, that motivated the mitzvah. And he continues, v'hayira, and fear is the same thing the other way. He's shadish, shasad leitaseh. It's the root of the 365 negative commandments, and he gives several levels of yirah. Ki yarei limrei, one is afraid of rebelling. Be'melech malcha amlacham hakadosh baruch hu, against the Eibishter, is the king of all kings. So you're afraid. You don't rebel against the Eibishter. Now, in your fear of rebelling against the Eibishter, there's different levels. There could be yiras ha'inah, you're afraid of being punished. There's yiras chait, you're afraid of the sin itself. There's yiras elikim, there's a fear called yiras elikim, and there's even a higher madrega than that, which is called yiras Hashem. So there's yira, I'm afraid. Oi, noch tife, yira pnimius mizu, a deeper fear. You're not afraid of him, you're embarrassed from him. Limrei seinek evaded to rebel against his glorious eyes. And to do something which in his eyes is considered evil, which is called te'avas havaya, anything which is abominable and disgusting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, asher sani, which he hates, heima klipes v'sitra achara, which is klipa. Asher nikosa me'adam atachti, it gets chayis from a person in this world who does an aveda. And he holds on, he continues to draw life. Because mitzvah sleisu and chas v'sholma, yid does avedas. So klipa has a unique, and you don't want to give klipa chayis, so you're afraid of doing it. That's it. Okay, so I want to finish with a meiser with the Kloisenberg Rebbe. We're going to read a lot of this next week again. I'm just giving you a heads up. We're not going to start from the beginning of the Pedic, but we're going to read a lot of this again. The Kloisenberg Rebbe, I knew a yid who was a chassid of his, Rabbi Rudowski. He journeyed from Chaim Berlin to the Kloisenberger to the Skalene Rebbe, then he became a Lubavitcher. He lived here in the end of his life. He was involved in Machachana, and he passed away in Vav Tishri, which is very, very interesting. So he told me that the Kloisenberger, he davened all the talk about Reichus. His davening took 2 or 3 hours, a regular day. And he always had a minyan at a yeshiva, and every day 10 bachar met the daven with him. And davening forever. It's like gedreite mit the shul. He could take a walk in Melish Menesh also. But he davened, he would have davening. Anyway, he was in an airport, and he davened shachas in 20 minutes start to finish. They found up such a timmel, and he davened down schnell. He davened a minyan, he davened, ran to the plane. So he says, Zeis, ich can do this oach. I can do this also. Anyway, for those who've been here for the last 6 months, Zeis, me can this oach. We learned almost the whole page. You see, we could. I'm a will, can learn an innovative. Okay, good.